Today's episode of the Mind Sculptors podcast is sponsored by TCG Player, your source for all your trading card game needs. Use our link in the description the next time you get your cards to help support the show. Today's episode is also made possible by our Patreon subscribers. If you want to support the show directly, head over to patreon.com/the Mind Sculptors and you can become part of the SCULPTY family today. Or if you don't want to do any of that, leave a like and comment on YouTube or a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts as an offering to Algorithm Jesus.
I took like a few edibles. I took like one more than I usually take. And I was like trying to read, and I've been reading The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, which is excellent, by the way. But I kept rereading the like same line in the book like 4 or 5 times, and I was like, wow, the writing quality of this got really bad all of a sudden. And that's what I realized. I was like, oh no, I'm just really fucking
I love that is something that you're willing to be like, yeah, this was I did some good drugs last night.
It was good. It was very fun. You and Phoenix got a fun text chain conversation.
I'll admit I was trying to fuck with you a little bit.
Yeah, really. It was very unclear.
I'm a big man, I'll admit it. I was trying to trip you out. It was funny as fuck.
Yesterday at 10:42, Cal with Dockside being banned, but also the 2 easiest ways to cast Arden being banned. Is the deck still a tier 0 strategy, as you are very frequently proclaim? And if so, does this mean you are in fact the chosen one meant to lead equipment to a future in which good old Christian combat will preserve our way of life?
And then after that point, I really just started spamming GIFs or however you call them. At one point, it was just 4 in a row where I just looked up the term trippy. And then I tried to get Cal to watch Teletubbies, which they would not conform to, which I thought would be very funny. Which is based off a story where I had a roommate I was living with at the time who was unaware that I took an edible. And was like, hey, dude, do you remember Teletubbies? And starts like showing me this clip. And he's not aware that I'm high, but I'm just watching Teletubbies like...
losing your marbles.
Just fully broken mentally.
Yeah. Last night was fun. Casting it multiple times. It's just like, are you good? And I'm like, yeah, I'm doing great. It was a good evening. And one of the things we learned from that evening is I am cEDH Jesus. And and given the way things have gone recently, it seems like the format really needs me. So, we're not releasing an episode in the middle of the week, for shits and giggles, right? Like we're here because
no shit, no
there's
giggle.
Some serious stuff happening. So welcome everybody to the Mind Sculptors. We're doing an emergency SCULPTY session. I'm Cal.
I'm Ian. Welcome to the emergency session. Buckle up, everybody. Did Ian have a video set to release this week? Did it get invalidated by bans? Did he send it to Cal and then realize that he has to completely re-record his video this week? Yeah, and so did a lot of other people. So buckle up, fucker. Pow, pow.
We're still releasing our set review on Monday. It just is what it is. I'm not re-releasing the second half of the set review or re-recording it. But
if we mention any of those banned cards, you get it.
I'll just make sure that I have like a editor Jace pop up and wink at the camera.
Sounds like editor Jace.
It sounds like an editor Jace thing. So if you didn't know, the really just EDH in general Commander got its whole world turned upside down. And I'd like to take a minute and just sit right there and tell you all about the bans in this town. called Commander.
Okay. You
I made
censored
that
it. I
work.
think you
I made
sewed
that
it up.
work.
Yeah.
I set it up. Yeah, so 4 cards got banned yesterday. The first one, and the saddest of all of them, is of course Nadu. I very upset about that.
Yeah.
That's the biggest loss of this in this, to me. It is. The other 3, I think more people care about than me. The other 3 are Dockside Extortionist, a card that I have been advocating for a ban for multiple years. And then 2 cards that I was not expecting and didn't really think should have been banned to begin with, but I understand the reasoning, is Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus. So this is in the this is a huge shift for the format in a way that I think we haven't seen. I think for cEDH, we haven't had a shift like this since Paradox Engine was banned. But I think as the format as a whole, we haven't seen a shift this big since
cards. Yeah.
since Band as Commander was taken away. Like I don't think we have seen as big a change in the format.
Are you saying
since
for
happened.
just general EDH?
Just generally in
yeah.
EDH. I think for cEDH, the last big change we had that is this format defining, in my opinion, was the Paradox Engine ban.
I think a lot of people, so it's Pension ban and like people saying like just the partners being printed. Like it was a pretty fundamental thing. Yeah.
So this is a big deal. There is a reason we were recording this in the middle of the week. We were kind of talking about this, and I saw you posted this on Twitter too. Is I thought it was a joke at first. Like I didn't think it was serious at first, because like I read through it and I was like, all right, where's the April Fools and all of this? Because it just like it felt so out of character for them, because historically the RC has been pretty slow to move on stuff, and I guess you could say they have been slow to move on these because they've been around since like Dockside Extortion several years, Jeweled Lotus 4 years, Mana Crypt since the inception of the format. Like, but that being said, it's shocking to see this much happening all at once. I mean, like, what were your initial thoughts on all of this?
Oh boy. Initial thoughts were definitely like some level of like disbelief, as we have already sort of covered, right? Like I did not think this was a real thing that was happening. And then when it happened, I think like it took me a second. And so I think there's sort of like 2 big reactions that are happening right now, which is people who are very convinced that like the format needs to split and that this is like the like straw that breaks the camel's back. And then there are people who I think more like myself who are just kind of go like, yeah, that's what cEDH is, right? Like it sucks, but like we move on and we adapt. We now have an opportunity to change all our decks and I don't know, at the end of the day, and this is after like a day of processing a lot of this information, right? But like someone was posting today like, oh yeah, the format feels like a turn slower, which I'm like, okay, sick. Like I'm kind of into that. Like the lack of variance kind of makes me feel more comfortable. I'm not going to lie. Mana Crypt was one of my favorite cards of all time. I've often like gone on this podcast and said like, I would be really, really upset if Fast Mana was banned. But then like I started thinking about it more and more and I'm like, that doesn't mean I was necessarily right. Like that I'm willing to kind of like say like, maybe that's not necessarily like the best thing for it. Cause like the more situations got described to me like, yeah, no more turn 1 Ristic studies without like, a Mox Diamond and a Soul Ring. Right. So that reality is a lot less crazy. I mean, I can't even tell you the amount of times in the tournament lately I've seen someone have like a land that could produce blue and then play Mana Crypt turn 1. And I'm like, oh fuck, the game's already in such a bad spot. Right.
Yeah.
And so with that in mind, like I do think there are certain things coming out of this that are good. I feel horrible for the specific deck people. The people who play Keurig or Niv Mizzet or Godo or Corvold, especially like those pilots, I think, and Atali's pretty up there too, right? Like I think
Atali might be able to make it through, but I think Atali's a
weird
tough one.
line, right? Like it's not as bad as like Corvold, right? But like there are certain decks that I feel bad for people who main pilot those decks and for who like a lot of their cEDH identity were associated with those decks. I'm like sorry that happened, right? There's decks like Sisay and stuff like that are more in the middle. Like I think Sisay and Atali kind of fit that zone of like they're worse, but they're still alive, right? Like they still live.
They just have to like change their like their patterns a little bit, which is like not bad.
75% of their enablers already weren't Dockside, right? Dockside was just the best one,
right?
And so like I don't think that's the end of the world for that deck, but I think the format just fundamentally changes. And once again,
I mean, that's why I compared it to the Paradox engine ban, because like this is one of the things that I keep reminding myself.
It's just unrelatable for a lot of people who like
it is like most people here haven't been around since 2019. But you know, like when Paradox engine banned, half the format went away. Like people like I wrote a incredibly nasty letter about that. And I like a lot of people I see out there reacting to this, I feel like are reacting the way I reacted 5 years ago about Paradox Engine. And it just like, to me, I feel like I've changed so much since then. And I look at that and I'm just like, I have been able to see how the format has been just fine since the thing that happened where I was like, this is going to ruin the format. And it was perfectly fine. And it's done nothing but grow since that point. And I think it will just continue to be fine. And these people who want to go off and splinter the format, I think they're going to find that it is a difficult task and not one that is a lot harder to take than I think they think it is. But that's its own thing. For my reaction about it, you could attest to this in the message that I did send to you guys. I did say rip Nadu like before I said anything else about anything else. And you were like, how is this thing you took away from this? And part of that is because like, for me, one, I feel like I have been sitting here for ages saying Dockside's on the chopping block, prep, it's going to be going away soon. I guarantee it. I've been saying this for like a year now, that I was kind of got the impression that Dockside was not long for this world. Regardless of whether or not I thought it should have been banned, I did tend to historically be in the camp that thought it should have been banned. Although recently I've kind of been closer to the maybe we should not ban it if we're not going to get rid of some other things.
So this is where I sort of come in, right? Like I have been, and we saw this on our ban episode, right? Like I have been very historically anti-Dockside ban, right? Like I said, I think it would be really bad for cEDH, all that stuff. But ironically, I think the nature of the fast mana going with it also made me more comfortable with it, which is never something I thought I would say. Like, seeing the other decks slow down made me go, oh, okay, like I guess it's not like I still think there is a non-creature bias in the format. I still would like 100%. To see a Bowmasters like eat fucking dirt but
eat rocks,
but I do think that there is some interesting design space that's like open now,
we were talking about this in our group chat yesterday with Phoenix, but one of the things that I kind of explained in there is I was like, I think Dorks just got a huge like boost in the arm, and
yes and no, right?
Yes and no, but like let me explain this a little bit, because I think just saying it like obviously like is just like, well, there's still Bowmasters, and yes, there's still Bowmasters. That is still an underlying issue that creature decks are going to face. Here is where I'm more optimistic about it because of what is banned. Is now on average your Rhystic Studies are more likely to drop a turn to 2 later than where they are now. A lot of decks are able to get Rhystic Study down on turn 1 pretty reliably. And this ban disrupts that pretty significantly. So on average, heuristic studies are going to be arriving later. So your major draw engines are generally going to be arriving later in the game than they have historically in this meta,
Yeah.
which means Bowmasters comes down as really not getting that many chances to pick off dorks and creatures early in the game like you're able to when people get it down in early heuristic study. It will still happen from time to time. But what's happened is now what I think is going to happen is that early game window for smaller creatures and dorks and stuff like that to gain a foothold is much bigger and much wider open than it was, 48 hours ago.
Yeah, I mean, just literally the difference between being able to have that, mana crypt land hold up Bowmasters versus, not having that is also a thing too, right?
Yeah.
Not that that's not a replicable pattern, right? But like it's something interesting. Yeah, as I said, like I was immediately like, the classic like crying, pissing, shitting, throwing up like as soon as I like saw the announcement. But then I like when I was forced to have to gather my thoughts and talk about it, like what I did for my video, I was like, like I like and to be clear, I had a lot invested into this, right? Like, and I want to make this clear because I think some people get this idea that like we have like not a lot like attached or whatever. Like, my mana crypt is literally the prize of my collection. It is a white border signed by Mark Teden mana crypt that I like hunted down from Spain because the white border ones are super hard to find, right? Like, it is genuinely something that I treasure. Like, it is one of my favorite things of all time. It makes me so happy whenever it comes out of my deck. It is something I am very emotionally attached to. And yet, as someone who plays a competitive card game for a living, we have had the luxury of not having our shit pulled out from underneath us all the time, as most formats do, right? Now, I understand the frustration that it feels like it was not for us, right? But that doesn't mean that might not have a positive implication, right? Like, I know there's a lot of people out there who are in the pro split the format thing, and in here I'll just say my sort of position on that in general is like, I am a competitive EDH player, right? And I've always been a competitive EDH player, which means that I will adhere to what I understand to be cEDH, which is the most competitive variant of Commander, right? Like, I am a Commander player who plays Commander at the highest power level, adhering to that ban list. If there is a new format created that keeps a lot of the logistics of what we know and love about cEDH, but decides that they are a well-run, and I'm going to emphasize well-run, permutation of that is a sub, or that is not a sub format, but its own unique format, I would consider adaptation to that. However, I think people also need to realize that just saying like you're making up the cEDH or TEDH rules is maybe a little bit interesting. I think like making your own format and labeling it as something else is probably a much better move. And I've sort of advised that to a number of people who've reached out to me about this kind of stuff already.
I think people are going to find that getting people to buy in is going to be really hard.
Yes.
And it just is what it is. And quite frankly, I think my opinion, this is not speaking for you, this is speaking for Callahan. I think it's stupid personally. Like,
I think
maybe that's harsh.
Maybe nicer ways to say it. Yeah.
Maybe there's nicer ways to say it, but I'm not known to be, like a keen speaker with, proper finding cutting ways of saying what I'm trying to say.
I think ill-advised is a way that you can say that and maybe be a little less harsh,
Perhaps, but regardless, I don't think it's a great idea. I think it's, I think there's a lot of hubris in the idea that I can make this and it will be better. Because I think if it was that simple, why have the multiple dozens of times that this has been attempted in the past not work? Right? Like this is it feels to me a struggle in futility. And because I've seen this happen so many times, I have been part of this community for 8 years. All right. I have seen this story in some version or another play out so many different times, myself being involved in it, a couple of them, it's exhausting. Nothing ever happens because it's impossible to make the type of change that I think these people want to make. Or maybe maybe it is possible, but it's a lot harder to accomplish than I think people really think about it. And I don't think that most people are going to realize exactly what it takes to get this going and how deep you know, making a ban goes and how much thought and time and like knowledge you need into it, especially in a format where you just don't get good numbers on a lot of this stuff because of the high variance of it alone, right? With 100 card singleton, add on to the fact that you're also in a multiplayer format so that your turn order now impacts another aspect of this. It is nigh impossible to get solid numbers to make what some have said are numbers based and statistics based decisions. You can't do it. And so you have to make a lot of gut decisions, which is what the RC does. Well, let's go through our power rankings. Actually,
Yeah.
let me pull
Oh,
that
that's
up
cute.
so
I
we
like
can.
that.
Let's first look over here. So we both had Timna Crom as number one on this
Mhm.
list, and with these bands, let's start off with the big one. You know, what are you? I know I have my thoughts. I think we're
Mhm.
pretty close in what we think about it, but you know, what do you think is going to happen to Timna Crom after
This
this?
deck gets nerfed.
Pretty substantially, I would say. Actually,
This is like the one good thing that we can all rely upon. No, I mean Tim Necrom eats it a little bit, right? Like we talked about it. The castability of your commanders early is always a big sell for this deck. Jewel Lotus being gone from this deck was one of the things that gave it an artificial shot in the arm. Like we've talked about.
I said this on Twitter.
Yeah.
I said, I can tell a lot of people started playing post Commander Legends because people I've seen a lot of people being like, oh, this doesn't hit Tim Necrom at all. And I'm like, Crom used to be considered uncastable.
Yeah.
Like there was a long period of time when the other two cards were still legal that people were like, you can't play Crom.
Yeah.
Like that is the power of Jewel Lotus.
Yeah.
Like I think Crom is significantly worse as a partner now than it was 48 hours ago.
And I did hear the argument that's like, yeah, but like that was our plan D anyways. And like, I'm super understandable of that. I will say the crutch of relying on Ristic Study and stuff like that is still there. But as you mentioned earlier in this episode already, it's slower, right? Like that is definitely something that
it's at minimum a turn slower.
I've seen way too many TNK pods where like the games where they don't draw Dockside, they kind of look like goobers just sitting around for a little while. And then the games where they hit Dockside kind of early on, like they then turn the corner really quickly and explode. So I think that deck losing Dockside will make it clear how bad their turbo plan really has always been. And how much it's relied on just drawing so many cards with Crom, and how quickly like the Dockside in particular has really pushed that deck super hard. So I think TNK becomes like a turn 4+ deck, if I'm being honest. You know, and there's going to be times where they reverse the Oracle you and they're like, aha, my machinations, but like that's not
every black blue deck can do that, right?
Yeah, exactly. But
special.
Like realistically, I think that deck did take way more of a hit than people are sort of expecting it to have, you know?
Yeah. I think that's a really big thing. And I also think the fact that like your consistency of like a turn 2 Timna too, like even if that's your plan C or whatever, is a lot lower because like, you know, this was one of the benefits that Timna Thrasios had for a really long time, right? Is you have those green dorks that make your consistency of getting that turn 2 Timna down like pretty good. And that is something that Timna Crom has historically pre-Jeweled Lotus kind of always struggled with, and you know, Mana Crypt kind of helped with some of that to some degree, but losing both of those accelerants I think is a huge knock to those decks.
Yeah, and also it was already like pretty definitively like one of the worst Mox Opal decks in the format. Like
I think it's now you just don't play Mox Opal,
right?
Like,
they were on like
see how you
14
can.
artifacts pre-ban. and now they go to 12 without the excuse of, well, sometimes Dockside makes me treasures. It's like, I don't think you can afford to be a Mox Opal deck anymore. And it's like,
Yeah.
what? This is now a reality where Timna Crom isn't a Mox Opal deck, or if they are, it means they have to reinvest into alternative pieces like Hope of Girapur and stuff like that just to
Mhm.
supplement an artifact package, which then significantly changes the way that deck plays. I think like if I were a Timna Crom main, right? Instead of trying to like slap a band-aid on things that don't exist and like mess around with that,
Right.
I think one of the first things I would be thinking about is like, yeah, Sensei's Top, Hope of Gear, or like stuff like that to
Yeah.
sort of supplement the curve. Because I mean, Counterbalance Top in Timna Crom has always been good, but we've just never, or we haven't had the space for it in a really long time. And I think this
Well,
would
I
be
think
one of
this
those
is where
packs.
like a kitten to fairy package gets a lot more enticing now.
Potentially, it's also still worse though. Like it is.
It is
I
still worse.
recognize that
Yes.
it is worse without crypt by a decent amount, which is
Yes.
tough because
But
then you want
I do
crypt.
think that you can still make an argument that you might want to move on to
Mhm.
it. Just as a, you know, like if you're still gonna want this like layered breach package, I think that you probably, because of what you're losing, need to move away from like a
Mhm.
turbo Nas strategy. I could argue you might cut Nas altogether because I think you're going to need
I think that's a consideration. I think
like
it's
I
genuinely a consideration.
like your curve is at minimum going to go up like pretty reasonably because you don't have other cards to replace them with that fill the exact same slot the same way.
Yeah.
And so like I think that you know it's going to be like a thing where I think like Timna Crom is going to look a lot closer to Tivit, I think,
Mhm.
now than it did 48 hours ago, right?
Oh, for sure, for sure. Yeah, and now the like why Tivit conversations are like, I don't know, it's kind of close, you know.
It
Like,
really comes down
yeah,
to
yeah,
it's like what do you want, the win con in the command zone
yeah. I mean,
um or
yeah,
not, you know.
yeah, and we'll talk about Tivit a little bit later too. Yeah.
Yeah. Moving on down to Rogsai. This is another deck that I think gets hit harder than I think a lot of people realize.
This is the
Um,
most contentious I
yeah.
I've seen of any deck. Some people are so convinced that it's the new tier 0, and some, I mean, not that it wasn't already pretty up there, but some people are also convinced that the deck took like a major lump and is like way
Mhm.
back down. I think it's somewhere in between. I
Yeah,
still
I think I should come down somewhere in the middle of that.
Yeah, I think it's still one of the best decks in the format, like by a good amount. But the consistency took a major hit. And I
Yeah.
think for people who don't understand that aspect of it, you're gonna have to remember what Rogsai looked like 8 months ago.
Mhm.
Because Rogsai 8 months ago was struggling with consistency. And we got these necro packages, these born packages, all that kind of stuff. But now you don't have the things like Crypt to
You don't have the
supplement
things to
that
turn the
transition.
corner on those.
Yeah, and not having Dockside 2 is big.
It's
It is
huge.
big. It is another thing to play and sack. Like I can't tell you how much the stonks on fucking Diabolic Intent went down with this band.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
it's just there is a real aspect to the hit on Rogsai for this. I don't know how much is the
I
question.
think the biggest change that you're going to see in Rogsai
Yeah.
is that, and this is the biggest thing, is that main phase nosing just got considerably worse. Um, and I think that what you're going to see is that the super proactive game plan of Rogsai is like, you know, still going to be there. But I think what you're going to see is in order to adapt, they're going to have to start doing like on my opponent's end step nauses to try and get as much as value as they can because you don't have a dockside, you don't have a mana crypt to, you know, kind of fudge the edges of a uh ad nause turn. And so your nauses get considerably worse when you don't have one, an incredible accelerant, or two, a really good way of just, you know, a free 2 mana off of a hit, right? Um, so I think that's going to be a big thing. I think overall it's probably still fine. But I do think, like you said, I think the consistency is a huge hit. And I think that you're going to find that the play pattern of this makes it a little more like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like it's really looking for the right moment to jump. instead of being like every turn pushing for it. I feel like Rogsai will have to be a little bit more patient moving forward.
More surgical with its decision making.
Yeah.
Sure.
I
Yeah,
think
I
that's
think
what I
it's still
see.
going to be fast and explosive, right? Because if the whole format's a little slower, then like Roxai still thrives by taking advantage of slow games, right? But I genuinely think it did lose some pieces that like basically allowed them to play on easy mode. I still think good pilots will still put up really good results with this deck right now, but I do think it moved from like a moderate skill level will allow you to succeed with the deck to like you need kind of an expert skill level to allow you to succeed with the deck right now.
Yeah, 100%. Moving on to our next deck in our tier list, Nadu, Winged Wisdom. How do you think Nadu's going to recover after this?
I will remember you.
It was a great 2 months, man.
Yeah,
it was a great 2 months.
Much like Icarus, Nadu flew too close to the sun.
It was a great 2 months, man. It was great. I loved every minute of it. Oh my goodness.
Nadu flew off to its whatever the Egyptian afterlife is, and
banned in fucking everything, dude. What format can you play Nadu in now?
It's just Legacy and Vintage.
It's just Legacy and Vintage. Like, fuck off. I want to play Nadu.
I think that's so funny to me. Honestly, I think I've been watching a decent amount of Kobol's content, and I will say Nadu and Legacy looks kind of sick, and I think that's like if there's a format where I think it should comfortably exist, Legacy feels like exactly that format.
Yeah, that's fine. But so did Commander. I loved it.
I also thought
it was so good.
It was very good, and also I'm not gonna miss. Like, I enjoyed the deck. It is a deck I would play. I am also not gonna like miss someone going, okay, I'm gonna trigger Nadu, and then they look at the card and they go, okay, it's a land, and I'm gonna have that enter, and then okay, I have a Bristly Bill. So that's going to put a counter on which creature do I put it on? I guess I'll put it on this one, and that'll trigger Nadu again. Okay, and then we're I'm not gonna miss that. I am not.
That's fair. That's super fair. That's super fair.
I loved playing against good pilots who were playing this deck because they played it well, they played it fast. When we were cooked, we knew we were cooked. I even was able to be like, I want you to play it out because I think there's a point where you fail, and then they failed it, and we were all like, oh my god, we got a turn, and then we still lost anyways, but it was cool. But I like that last thing I described, which is like on like the LGS level, the 1K, 2K level of like tournaments, that type of Nadu, I'm not going to miss. And I'm sorry. It was awesome in the 99. I mean, you and I went crazy for Breakfast Warriors. Nadu in the 99 was one of the coolest things to happen in the format in a long time. It was bound to happen. Like, we salute you, good bird soldier.
Salute you, young prince. Short and bright.
I like this idea that like a lot of whatever permutation of subformats is going to exist, and it's just going to be like Niv, Nadu, and Corvo players. Like, we're okay. Like,
we're alive. Oh man. So Sis, let's next deck on the tier list. Sisse, Weatherlight Captain. What do you think? You're the Sisse pilot, some would say. You know?
I don't know about the Sisse pilot. I am one of many very smart Sisse pilots. And I think Sisse is okay. I think Sisse is not dead. I think there have been people who were like, is our girl gonna die? And it's like, no, it's just worse, right? Like,
I think Derevi loops look a lot better now.
The Derevi loops look better. Everything with Bloom Tender and Fabro and Selvala still works, right? Mm-hmm. It's just you have to recognize that we lose that dockside speed. But once again, I mean, what did we just talk about? The whole format's slowing down. So you have the luxury to still be as parasitic as we always have been, right?
And it's not like Sisse is a deck that like is gonna it hurts that Jewel Lotus and Mana Crypt are gone, but that is a deck of all of the 3 mana commanders, right? Like I think that and Najeela are the two that are like, honestly, it could have gone a lot worse.
Yeah,
right. Like I think those two decks are
a lot of tempo realistically, but like I also understand that like for a long time we were just playing Mana Dork into Najeela anyways, and the deck was still like, we're doing good. Like, you know what I mean?
Oh, darn, we won. How'd that happen?
Yeah. And so like, I think that's fine. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it will be very interesting moving forward to see what happens with these commanders for sure. But Sisay, I think, you know, I like a card like Chainer is one that I'm like much more back
More
on right
interesting,
now.
yeah.
Because like now the tappers having haste is at a higher premium than ever, right? Like there's a
For
lot
sure.
more of that nuance. Like I'm maybe even considering shit like Lightning Greaves, like just to make sure my stuff has haste, right? Or maybe less cringe options. So there's stuff out there, right? But like
Maybe less cringe.
there are things out there for Sisay pilots. I think y'all we are gonna be okay. You know, I think Sisay is a deck that it's got a lot of oomph. It's got a lot of like, oh no, now we have to play more cool, unique legends in the deck.
Y'all remember when Opposition Agent got printed?
Yeah.
And Rebel posted that video.
Sisay's dead video. Yeah, yeah. The infamous Sisay's dead video. We remember it. Yeah.
Sisay's dead. Long live Sisay.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I think that it's
Sisay's probably cEDH is dead. Long live cEDH. Like we're cooking. Like this is just a different format now.
Yeah. All right. On to my boy. On to Tivit.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have opinions on it, and I have big opinions about it.
Listen,
what are your thoughts?
I'm not gonna restrict you. I want you to pop off.
Well, you know, my look at this. I was talking to Cyril on the phone yesterday about this. He was laughing at me because I said, honestly, I'm happy they banned him. You want to know why? Because it means Tivit pilots can get out of the brain rot headspace of, oh man, I got a turn 2 Tivit. I can slam Tivit. No, just wait for your window like you're supposed to do with the deck anyway. And now your mana rocks force you to do that. So you don't get tempted. The way I described it is I think you might remember this a few years ago on one of our gameplay episodes. It was you, Braden, Sage, and Phoenix were playing a game together, and Phoenix was on Lavinia. And Phoenix had an opportunity to put the game away if he tutored up Omen Machine instead of Knowledge Pool.
Yeah.
And he got Knowledge Pool, and I lost my shit because it would drove me nuts seeing so many people that play Lavinia do that over and over and over again.
Sure.
So I cut it from the deck to stop tempting people from playing it. And now the RC's done it for me. You don't have to worry about your turn 2 Tivits anymore, kids.
Yeah.
Stop getting tempted by it. You don't need it. Play your grind pieces. Play your control effects. Be a control player. Embrace the control. I'm so excited about it, honestly. Tivit is going to be played correctly. Makes me so happy.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like you can cut your fucking Dauntlesses and your Blind Obediences now. I don't think you need to necessarily. Blind Obedience is still kind of a ripped ass.
I think you'd probably go down on Dauntless for sure.
Yeah, for sure, Dauntless. Yeah,
I think Blind Obedience hitting creatures is like huge.
Yeah, it's not irrelevant. I think.
Yeah.
Right. Like, but I don't know. It's an interesting place for Tivit. I said it was one of the big winners from the ban. Now, Cal is 100% right. Like the discourse about like the Jeweled Lotus Mana Crypt, no Tivit cast early, big sad is very real, right? But also like
shouldn't have been doing that to begin with.
Yeah, I think maybe like you're maybe putting it in a bit of a black and white lens, right? Which is fine.
I would never do that for content. I don't know what you're talking about. I would never over exaggerate and speak with hyperbole on an episode of our podcast.
I love how many people have like talked to me independently of this podcast, and they're just like, I like how your role is just rating Callahan.
Listen, I have a character that I play on the show. I think Ian knows this.
Yeah.
Where I am big, hyperbolic, loud.
Yeah.
You know, that is the character that I play. And then people meet me in real life and they're like, oh, you're not that, huh?
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Cal's actually a tiny Italian.
Mamma mia.
Cal's real voice is much like a squeaky Mario, actually.
It's a lot closer to Mickey Mouse and Mario. Mamma mia. I really was trying to do but it keeps coming out as Mario. I'm blaming the drugs from last night. That's the only thing that makes sense to me. It's the residual effect.
You're just so drugged out, man.
Just so zonked. But yeah, no, I think Tivit's in a great place. I think two things, in full sincerity, two things. Is that one, the format getting this much slower is like a huge win for it because it does play into the way the deck kind of already wants to play, which is slow, grindy, wait for the right moment and kind of grind them into dust, so it were, right? And the other thing too is you don't have to worry about a dockside now, so you're much less concerned about developing your stacks pieces, and you're also less concerned about what stacks pieces you are considering. And that's a huge thing, right? Like,
I mean,
I think that is maybe the biggest win for the deck out of all of it.
Yeah. But like a lot of stacks focused strategies just got a boost, right? Like by this thing.
Oh, we haven't even talked about how Blood Moon is super viable again all of a sudden. Like we haven't even gotten a chance to talk about that yet, but trust me when I tell you that I am actively brewing a Blue Moon deck right now. Yeah. I'm so excited.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that too, because like the biggest thing for me with Blue Moon was like, oh yeah, we lost Dockside, the thing that shuts down Blue Moon. But I'm like, wait, is it also lost its best win condition? Shit.
Well, here's the deal. You're gonna have to find something.
Yeah. Fill in the cracks.
Blue Moon existed before Dockside, so I think it will continue to exist. Listen, ISO Rev, baby. ISO Rev, baby. Let's bring it back.
Plenty of Karanos in my day. The deck was bad. I drew like 15 cards, and then to be like, wow.
But we have better commanders than we did back in the day, baby. We have good commanders now. Speaking of a blue-red commander, Niv Mizzet, I think got sent to an early grave.
Yeah. It's not like we had Niv before we had Jewel Lotus.
Yeah.
We
didn't have Niv before we had Dockside though.
No, that's not true.
Well, we had it for a brief time. It didn't do much before Dockside.
Yeah. I think realistically, if you're going to play Niv, you have to go back to Isochron Niv. Like you have to. I think that version of Niv, which is great because it doesn't get punished by Dockside. Yeah. Right. But like you just have to fundamentally change how you build Niv. Like if you look at old 2015, 2016 Niv Mizzet decks, they were like, we're playing Gilded Lotus. Like we're going deep in the dumpster to try and get you a Niv Mizzet. We got the deals. Like it is not a good time. We've got dumpster fire Niv Mizzet. It is still playable. Unlike a deck like Corvold where it lost the thing that makes it work, it is just harder to play Niv now, right?
Yeah. I think Niv just went from being like, like a really nice reputable loan from like a bank at a Wells Fargo or something like that. And now Niv is like a payday lender out by like the Dollar Tree.
I was thinking like the dude with the watches on the side of the road, like, hey, you want a $10 watch? I'm Niv Mizzet. Like,
hey, I'm Niv Mizzet. You want to watch?
No, I promise. Gilded Lotus really cast this big dragon.
See, I didn't know that Niv Mizzet was from Staten Island. So
I got a lot of plans for the Izzet Guild. Trust me. We're going to draw cards. We're going to cast instants. We're going to cast sorceries.
You know what? I saw that the Netflix Magic series got, reinvigorated. Oh, yeah, and this is my call out and my challenge to the creators of that show. Give me Pete Davidson voice Niv Mizzet.
Okay, that's a different sort of challenge than I was expecting to have to process today. But
no, I want Staten Island Niv Mizzet. Moving on down, Thrasios Vial is a deck that I had on here. What do you think about Thrasios Vial and like where it stands in the particular group?
I don't hate it. It's fine, I think, is kind of where I'm at.
ISO Rev. ISO Rev.
Rev. And I'm excited to talk about this because I do think Dockside pushed ISO Rev out of the format.
Yeah.
I think ISO Rev is a bad win condition, but it is getting to the point where it's a necessary win condition. The problem is we also lost one of the easiest enablers for ISO Rev, which was Mana Crypt.
I still got Soul Ring, baby.
Yeah. Oh, and look, like Mana Vault, Grim Monolith do it on their own, right? Like they're holding up they are the Atlas holding up the world that is Isochron Scepter. It's still a shit win condition. I cannot stress that enough. It is a bad win condition. But I still think like my question for you is like, why Thrasios Vial nowadays? Like, what is black giving you?
Honestly, I think my question is why not just Thrasios Tymna? Like, what is red giving you, right?
Cal, I think Thrasios Timna is one of the biggest winners.
I think Thrasios Timna has returned to pre-Flash status. I think it is now the de facto best. It is.
I don't know about de facto. That might be in the hyperbole train for me, but like I do think it is. I think it's back up at the top tables. Like I don't care that it lost the Nadu stuff. The format is slow enough now where it not having the ability to go Dockside, haha.
We just got done talking to about like reanimating Valgavoth, right?
Yeah,
like there's all sorts of things like that where
Razakats ish style decks are
back on the menu, boy.
Business. They're back.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing that I keep trying to bring. I stayed off Twitter yesterday because I did not want to engage with anything. I'm 200 pages left in the Way of Kings. I want to read this fucking book. I don't want to engage in all this stuff. I didn't want to record this episode, but here we are. I wanted to finish this fucking book, but instead, I stayed off of Twitter. I collected my thoughts, and the big thing is that I really think this is a huge. Like people are like, oh, what happens to these fringe decks? I'm like, what about the other fringe decks that just got a huge boost because of this, right? Like, there's winners and losers here in this situation. I think Thrastim is a huge winner here. The other thing that I think is a huge winner. I know this is kind of moving away from our tier list that we were going through, but I want to talk about it because it's on my mind. I think Urza is now maybe better positioned now than it's been in
years,
a long ass time.
Years.
Think about now the fact that you have multiple Flash enablers.
Yeah.
You have all of these different pieces. It does take a hit because Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt were very good for that deck. But I think the net loss of Dockside, because that just is such a hard punish to that deck, I think that deck is just right back up to viability.
Yeah. No, I'm with you.
Now, I've seen you talk a little bit about this on the Twitch here. What are your thoughts about Kinnan?
Probably the biggest winner from this whole thing. If I have to plant a flag in who got the least scathed and probably came out the hottest, it's Kinnan.
Kinnan didn't care about any of that.
Kinnan lost Mana Crypt, which helped at times. The format just took a turn off the average speed. And Kinnan is, I've often gone on record calling Kinnan cocaine green. And now we're in a format where green is just kind of a necessary evil, even in the face of Bowmasters. And Kinnan's over there like, hey, boys, you ready to flip some Nezals? We're back, baby.
Hey, kid, you want to buy some death sticks?
About Kinnan flipping in today, and I was like, he never left, but now he's even better. Like, the problem with Kinnan still exists, still super high ceiling, still super low floor. But when everybody else is struggling to even walk,
I think
still running.
I think some of the other like things that went away and how hard it hits some of the other decks really massages away some of those issues, right? Like even just adding a turn or two to the time of a game is huge for even average Kinnan decks because it buys them time that they don't normally get.
Kinnan's
and that's
biggest
huge.
problem was surviving the first two turns. Good Kinnan pilots needed to survive those first two turns, 2 to 3 maybe sometimes, and then they were cooking.
Now you have to just survive the first 3 or 4 turns, right?
A lot less hard.
Turn 4 is on average where most decks are probably going to end up being, like, right? Like we were a turn 3 format, for a long time, but I think losing Crypt and Dockside and Jeweled Lotus pushes it back to maybe a turn 4, which I think is great. Like I think that's fine.
So that's kind of the thing I'm interested in the format is like, once again, I was super like, holy shit, I can't believe they're doing this. But I'm like, honestly, like cEDH being a turn slower might not be bad. Like, and I think what people might get confused by too, right, is that like you think about it and you're like, oh, well, the turns took a long time before, right? But it's like, but if the whole format's a turn slower, what you're basically doing is you're taking out the amount of like, okay, this one person had I have the nuts, boom, 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 play the things, right? And what instead you're replacing it with is more times where, okay, like playing a talisman and holding up something on turn 2 is like a realistic play pattern nowadays, right?
Well, I mean, think about it like in the like thought, like think about it, conceptualize it similar to how StarCraft works, right? Because like early StarCraft, you have to like build your base, get those. I mean, I don't know enough about StarCraft, but like early in the game, you have to like before you even start fighting other players, you have to establish your base, get things going, build things up, and then you start going after other opponents. And I feel like it's very so I have now exhausted my StarCraft knowledge, but uh the point of the metaphor being what we have effectively done is giving you more time to establish your base for all of these other decks. And I think that is a huge win for everybody because now you don't have to like the opening hands when you're keeping them and you're mulliganing, you don't have to sit there and you have to consider, okay, I need to have enough to start my own game, but also have some amount of interaction and these things. Now you get to have a little bit more focused hands. And I think that's a huge boon to the format.
Yeah, that's a fantastic way of describing it. I completely agree. I think there is yeah, I just think like, I don't know. I originally was like a little nervous, as I said, but like genuinely, I think that the format being a little more balanced speed wise is not going to be a bad thing, right? Like I think it was just like like you're still going to mull it to the nuts, right? But the nuts is just going to be a different. The nuts are different.
They're blue now.
Yeah. Anyways.
I don't know what you thought I was talking about. I was talking about the fact that blue is a lot better.
Blue is better, and I think that's the biggest downside of this whole thing.
Yeah,
it's just like
I think red took a sizable hit from this. I think is a pretty easy like but I do think there's like another aspect of that too, right? I mean, where it's like if red decks were that reliant, right, on dockside, is it a bad thing that we're forcing them to move on to other strategies, right? Like, is that a bad thing? Sure. If they were that reliant on that
nuanced conversation, then I think I think anyone attempting to answer that question would be somewhat arrogant.
Yeah.
At this time.
Well, and that's the thing. It's like, I don't know the answer to that. My question is that necessarily a bad thing? And I think we don't really have a clear answer for that. I think time is going to show that out.
Yeah.
But I think that, looking at it as this is a bad thing for red and bad thing only, I think that for mono red decks, this is a huge loss, unless you're Magda, in which case you just kind of shrug and move along.
Magda's a big winner too. Yeah.
Magda's just like, okay.
Yeah. Like, we lost our easy I win button.
I guess I'll use the other 90 easy I win buttons. I actually think Magda's significantly better now.
Yeah.
I genuinely think it is. I think that none of these pieces impact its stability in the slightest. And I think the fact that you're slowing the format down, like I said, you're also slowing the speed at which Bowmasters comes down and how much they're going to get those pings in. I think Magda looks a lot better in a format where early games, like, and again too, right? Like we were talking about, that early game is going to give decks more times to get their footing because the early games just could be slower inherently. And I think that's a big winner of it, because think about how powerful Magda is once it gets an engine going, right? And giving it an extra turn to establish that, I think, is going to give it way more ability to pop off in ways that I don't think people were prepared for.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's another one of the big winners for sure.
Well, a lot has changed. A lot has happened. What are your thoughts? Just one thought.
List?
We went through most of it. Here. The only one we didn't hit here, we did talk about Atali earlier. In more detail, I do think Atali's probably fine. I think it's going to lean a little bit heavier into green shenanigans.
So the biggest upside is that we can, like, what we lose in speed, we can regain in a mid-range plan that relies a little bit more heavily on the moon style effects, like Maggot, the moon, blood moon, etc., which those were cut for not being impactful enough in more recent additions to the deck. So that gives us a grindier game plan that we previously did not have. Now,
I also
obviously,
think Sticker Goblin's like a huge like bonus
Sticker
too, that you
Goblin
get to keep
is
it.
still real for sure.
Yeah.
Like I'm keeping Cloudstone in the deck because one, I mean, it just works with Sticker Goblin, right?
Right.
I have to reconsider the sort of pros and cons of the Earthcraft lines because like they still work with some stuff with Cloudstone Curio. So like that's a really nuanced conversation. In those
I think
things,
you can only really make that decision until you like test a
yeah,
couple of different
yeah.
builds of it.
I don't
honestly.
think Atali is dead. I don't think the bans were kind to it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I don't think it's like dead though. But it's going to take a
It's just
little
a-
bit of TLC. I think it's going to look more like one of my earlier variants of Atali, or it's going to have to rely more on shit like Geosurge, which is like sometimes you gotta make choices like that, and it sucks a little bit. But
Hey.
it being a speed based deck, obviously it looks worse. More
Mhm.
mid-rangey decks are going to be better now, I will say. So speed decks are suffering.
The Ross Tuna, baby.
Yeah, which is like it's fine. I do think like there were ways to adjust that obviously I would have preferred to where we are now, but
Yeah.
I understand
I
where we're at, you know?
yeah, and I think like my final thoughts with everything, just kind
Yeah.
of like wrapping it up a little bit. Like my like full impression of this is that, you know, I think the only change I would have made to this band personally is I wouldn't have banned Nadu personally. I understand their reasoning for it. I think it's a little overblown personally, but I understand where they're coming from. But the only thing I would have also done is I think I probably would have just went ahead and banned Bowmasters anyway. It might be fine, but I do think that I would just rather be done with it instead of letting it hang around.
Yep.
That's kind of my, bias towards playing creature and mid-range decks.
Yep.
But I do think that, that is the only thing I would have done. Otherwise, I think that generally speaking, I like what this band did. I like the shakeup. I don't think I saw some people calling this a spite ban. I think that's insane. This is just simply not that.
I can understand if you give the format a conspiratorial eye, how you would draw that conclusion. I also think it is a very wildly negative and insanely pessimistic conclusion to draw based on the events that happened. And also weirdly, like, why would people who make decisions for millions of people suddenly go like, yeah, but fuck these people in particular? Like that is kind of crazy.
Yeah. I think generally speaking that this was them trying to further make the ban list clear on what they don't want people to be doing. And I think that these bans are reflective of that, right? Like we've made the comparison before with Nadu, that Nadu is very similar to Pension, right?
Yeah.
We've made the comparisons before with Dockside and Prime Time, and they don't want people doing Prime Time stuff. We know that all of the Moxen are banned, right?
Yeah.
Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt are very close to the Moxen and Black Lotus, right?
Yeah.
So like the bans are one in line with other things that are existingly banned. One, two, they are again clear signposts as if you're in casual spaces, we kind of don't want these sorts of things around. And if they get out of hand again, we will deal with them.
Yeah.
But, otherwise, to their credit, one thing I think is very interesting here is the fact that, like the other stuff that stays requires some those like 0 mana artifacts, right? Require some type of trade-off in order to get mana from them, right? Mox Diamond, you have to have a land in hand to discard to it.
Sure.
Mox Opal have to have a certain number of artifacts. Chrome Mox, you have to exile a card to it. Mox Amber, you have to have a legendary permit or a planeswalker or creature on the field to make it work. So like the other ones that stay around, like Soul Ring in Mana Vault, being 1 mana isn't a lot, but there is an investment into it, right? I think looking at that, I think that the stuff that stays around has a like substantial or more of a drawback than just maybe 2 life or 3 life every round when you have 40 life. Like that's not really a drawback. We've seen that, right? Like
It is in like 10-turn games, but that's not how cEDH works all the time.
and so like I think generally the stuff that they kept around forces people to make trade-offs for playing them, and the stuff that they also took away were stuff that was probably not great for the health of the format, generally speaking, anyhow. So I think that this is fine. I think cEDH is fine. I don't think there is need to split the format.
Yeah, and I guess I'll do my concluding thoughts too, which is like, do I think that this was the optimal bannings for cEDH? I think I'm a little more negative on that than you are, right? Like, I think that this was not like, if I could in a vacuum hope certain things were happening for cEDH, this is not what the outcome I would be hoping for is. But I genuinely think the lack of mana crypt I am already seeing in play patterns as I'm exploring new decks, as I'm like working on experimenting with lists and stuff like that. There is a fascinating change that is coming because of that. I once again feel awful for the Corvo players, for the people who think Sisay is dead now, for the Niv players, for the Godo players, the Keurig players. Like, I
feel really bad for Niv players, honestly. Like that deck is bad.
I mean, like, I mean, especially some of those people that we just mentioned. Like, the Corvold and I think Corvold, Keurig, and Godo especially are just like really questioning whether those can even be a thing anymore, right?
Yeah,
and that sucks. And I like feel so bad for those players. That part is the worst part of this whole thing, is the people who've had those banned out from underneath them. But as you mentioned, like, I felt the same way when Joyra Paradox was killed, when Green White Sisay went from one of the best decks in the format to almost unplayable, right? Yeah, like this has happened before, and obviously people had strong feelings about it before. I saw a lot of people talk about selling out of Commander when Paradox was banned, but I also, Commander and competitive Commander wasn't anything like what it was before, what it is now, right? So there's a lot to digest and interpret with all of this stuff, but at the end of the day, as I mentioned, like, I am a cEDH content creator. I have been playing cEDH for half a decade now, and I'm going to continue playing cEDH. I called the store I was going to go to this weekend to be like, hey, just checking, you're using the Commander ban list, right? And they were like, absolutely. And I was like, awesome, because I am going to take our beats, I'm going to take the lumps, take the L's that we've suffered, and I'm not invalidating any lumps we've suffered, but I'm also going to get up, gonna go to the store and be like, what does new cEDH look like, everybody? What did you guys bring? What's the new stuff? What are we experimenting with? What do you think's best right now? What's the format looking like? I'm gonna go and explore and give a shit about this thing that I love, because I'm gonna keep trying to expand the space of cEDH, as I've been doing since day one. I'm gonna keep trying pushing the boundaries of cEDH, as I've been doing since one. And I'm going to keep working with people. And I've already had clients come to me like, hey, what are we doing in this space? And I said, let's sit down, let's talk, let's figure out what the next steps are. And if eventually the next steps are, we have a curated tournament EDH thing, that's fine. I'll talk about it then, right? But in the meantime, I'm going to put effort into making cEDH an inclusive, diverse community. I'm going to put time into working on cEDH strategies, and I'm going to go to cEDH tournaments and play cEDH with the ban list that we have for right now, and try and take the positives out of it, like we've been talking about today, and enjoy the fact that this card that I love got banned, instead of just being angry. And also, for those who financially lost a lot of money because of this, and for those who like made these investments while they were investments that really meant a lot and were time and build up, like, it sucks. It does. And you have every right to feel your feelings. No one's saying you don't. I think, make sure we do that in a respectful way, as I've always asked. But cEDH is not dead. cEDH does not need to explode, does not need to do this whole thing. I think cooler heads will prevail. I'm honestly kind of excited to just do something new. Like,
me too, honestly.
Wanted a shakeup. I don't think this is the shakeup anyone wanted, but it's the shakeup we got. And you know what? I'm going to go to and play some Magic this weekend, and I'm going to have a great time because I love this fucking format. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. That all being said, Ian, people want to come and talk to you about this format and what they should do and build and how they should adapt to this change. Where can they find you?
Hey everybody. Yeah, you can find me at youtube.com/ComedIanMTG. You can see my other channel, the stuff I talk about on this stuff. But if you want cEDH coaching, if you want to talk shop about how to adapt your decks to the next cEDH, right? If you're interested in all that kind of stuff, talking about what to expect in tournaments moving forward, all those things, feel free to hit me up at comedianmtg@gmail.com. You can find me at comedianmtg on Twitter and Instagram. And you can find me at comedian_MTG over on Discord. Happy to chat with everybody. There's been a really healthy discussion in my Discord. I've been popping in and being like, all right, guys, chill on these things, and then popping out, and then obviously having like really healthy discussions about like what the future holds. And it's been nice because it's always been a space where I've really highly encouraged brewing, and a lot of people are like, all right, guys, like we're in it,
Right.
So it's really cool stuff there. But yeah, I think cEDH is going to look a little bit differently. But I'm going to be heading to cEDH tournaments as always, and I'm going to be playing this format as always, and I'm going to be making adaptations in my decks as always. So we're gonna full send it, and I'm excited to see what the future holds.
It'll be fun. I'm excited to see what you guys all come up with over there. If you want to support the Mind Sculptors and what we're doing here on this channel, you can head over to patreon.com/the Mind Sculptors. You can also leave a like and a subscription and a comment on this channel. That is free and helps us out immensely. And thank you everybody for all the support and everything. And enjoy the bonus emergency episode midweek. I think this is the first time we've ever done something like this, actually, in like 4 years of this channel. But this felt like one that was worth popping in midweek to say something about. So with that being said, we will see y'all next week. Regularly scheduled programming resumes Monday. Take it easy, everybody. Stay sculpty.
Bye.